It's potentially a big win. You know, some people say it's a huge win. I say trust but verify. Or maybe we should say distrust and verify. So we'll see.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
We have with us right now Stephen Greenhouse, former New York Times labor reporter. He is now a Century Foundation Senior Fellow and author of Beaten Down, Worked Up, The Past, Present, and Future of American Labor. Stephen Greenhouse, thank you for taking the time.
Very nice to be here.
Absolutely. And well, let's talk about the Starbucks campaign. They recently got a huge win. Obviously, we can, reserving our right to amend our opinions as details come out. But it looks like a huge deal. Can you tell us what the details are as you see them right now, and your interpretation of what this means for workers at Starbucks and also workers, across the country in the same industry and others?
So a little background. So in December 2021, more than 2 years ago, workers at several Starbucks in Buffalo, New York, voted to unionize. And they were the first first company-owned Starbucks in the whole country that unionized, first of more than 9,000 to unionize. And since then, nearly 400 Starbucks have unionized. So that was 26, 27 months ago. And yet not one of the unionized Starbucks stores has a union contract. And, the workers say that Starbucks has illegally fired over 100 workers for supporting a union, and it's illegal to fire people in retaliation for supporting a union. And the National Labor Relations Board, the federal agency that enforces worker rights and oversees union elections, it's found that Starbucks has, illegally fired several dozen workers, has illegally closed some recently unionized stores, has illegally cut back hours of workers for unionizing. So, that is and was a very prominent fight, and it's gotten very nasty. And people say that the union busting is the most aggressive and most illegal since the famous J.P. Stevens campaign in the South, a textile company in the South, and the Norma Ray company in the 1960s, 1970s. So this past Tuesday, there was a big announcement where Starbucks and its union, the Starbucks Workers United, announced sort of a peace agreement where Starbucks, after fighting tooth and nail against, really after dragging its feet for 2 years and doing very, very little to move forward to reach a contract, it said, we are ready to negotiate a foundational framework so that we could reach an agreement. And Starbucks was giving all sorts of raises and new benefits to workers at its non-union stores, but not giving them to its unionized stores. And that was really to make things tough for the unionization effort. And Starbucks also said, now we will give those raises and benefits to people at our 390, 400 unionized stores. So that's good. So a lot of people, not me, are jumping up and down saying this is a huge win. The question is Starbucks now committed to really reaching a first contract for these 400 stores within a reasonable period of time, or will this still be dragged out for another year or two? Will it take 4 years instead of 2 years indications are good. I, having written a ton about Starbucks, have come to distrust them. They would say, when the first unionization efforts began in Buffalo and elsewhere, and they were firing workers and closing stores, they said, we are not anti-union. Like, you take me for an idiot? You tell me you're not anti-union? And now they say, I'm a journalist. I usually try to treat what people say as like something that's credible. But when Starbucks says, we have not broken the law once in any of our unionization and any of our anti-union efforts, even though the National Labor Relations Board has filed 128 separate complaints against them, alleging more than 1,000 individual illegal violations. and they say we didn't break the law once. It's like, so I'm somewhat distrustful of Starbucks. Having said that, some people in the union say, no, Steve, you're being too pessimistic. You're being too distrustful. Starbucks vows that it's turning a page. It vows that it's going to finally move forward and reach an agreement. So if Starbucks does reach an agreement, and if it stops fighting so hard against the union, if it stops breaking the law, that could be a huge deal, because Starbucks right now has become the most visible unionization fight in the country. And Starbucks has, developed a reputation as the most, the biggest, worst, most egregious union buster in the country. So that if Starbucks has been pressured to make peace and reach a good contract, that will be a huge win. It will encourage many more Starbucks stores to unionize, and might encourage, workers at McDonald's or Chipotle or other Amazons, or, to try to unionize as well. So it's potentially a big win. And some people say it's a huge win. I say, I don't often quote Ronald Reagan, but, trust but verify, or maybe we should say distrust and verify. So we'll see.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Yes, I think that makes a lot of sense. Some people have compared it to the agreement after the UAW's sit-down strike in Flint, and there was at least one labor historian on Twitter who kind of balked at that. But I recently just finished reading 2 books on the Flint sit-down strike. And, kind of like you right now, when I read the agreement, in the book and the details of it, I was a little underwhelmed. And and there was some amount of underwhelming among the people in the factory. Now, ultimately, they did get a contract and it was good. But the deal at the end of the sit down strike was just that GM would not negotiate with anybody else for 6 months for any of their employees at any of their locations, and that they would negotiate with the UAW for the plants that struck. And so, it's like, that seems like we're coming to it actually seems like it's a pretty similar kind of situation here where Starbucks is now saying that, we're going to give back pay actually to all the people that we've been withholding benefits from. I think that was one of the things that's going to be a huge deal that I think will really potentially incentivize people at other Starbucks to unionize. They say, oh, look at this, Joe Blow over here working at Starbucks who unionized, that he just got a $5,000 check, back pay check, right? I mean, that's pretty big. And so it seems kind of similar in that, at the point of the agreement, there's reason to be hopeful, but like you said, you kind of want to verify. I wonder what you think about that comparison.
So in my book, Being Down Worked Up, I have a chapter about the Flint sit-down strike, and I say it was, by far the most important strike in the 20th century. And my sense is, it was, they shut down one of General Motors. General Motors was then the biggest, most powerful company in the country. And they knew that if we could unionize that powerful company, that would be humongously symbolic and get the ball rolling at other. So they closed down one of the key factories for GM that made parts that dozens of other GM factories needed. And it's in the middle of winter for 6 weeks. GM shut down the heat and shut down the heat for a while, and then was worried the pipes are going to freeze and then turn the. Anyway, so but GM basically surrendered after 6 weeks because this huge company had been shut down, and General Motors had been trying to undercut the union, the UAW, by having a company union to try to sabotage unionization efforts. So I thought it's a pretty big deal when General Motors said, you'll be the only union we negotiate with for 6 months. It's kind of saying, we're going to stop using this company union to try to slit your throat and undercut you. I thought that was, and pretty quickly they got a so-so contract. It wasn't great, but it was like, it got the ball rolling, that they had a contract. And the reason you knew right away it was a success is that dozens or even hundreds of other factories started having sit-down strikes, right? And the amount of unionization in the next few years after that 1937 strike ended was huge. I mean, that was the biggest surge of unionization, I think, in the United States history in those 2 or 3 years right after. So, if the Starbucks workers at 2 months or 3 months got a great contract, that's going to make a huge difference too. I mean, it won't be as huge as the Flint sit-down strike, which was that was the day after the strike began. It was the lead story in newspapers across the country. That was a big deal. It really riveted the nation's attention. I mean, the Starbucks efforts are also a big deal, but it's not as if the nation's attention is focused on it as much.
Right. Yeah. It's not a whole economy kind of crushing or invigorating industry, certainly.
If I may just add very quickly. So, Starbucks, I think, is justly called, the most aggressive union buster in the country right now, and the most aggressive one in decades. And, for the union to get this agreement where Starbucks might have really turned the corner and say, we're ready to deal with you and negotiate with you and reach a contract, that's very important. It shows that the union has been very successful at hurting, pummeling Starbucks' image. Starbucks stock price lost $12 billion between November and December after a series of strikes, after a series of public relations hits. People told me that there was a lot of pressure on Biden to speak out against, Biden's having problems winning young workers, partly because of Gaza, partly because the Supreme Court overturned his student debt plan. That's not his fault. And that people are saying we're pressuring Biden to try to step up against Starbucks. And I think Starbucks might have been scared of that. And, so there are many. Starbucks is really starting to feeling the heat. Last week, students at 25 universities called for a boycott of Starbucks. So the pressure is really on.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.